King Michael of Romania speaks to the nation. All across Romania, people cluster around the radio. He tells them momentous news. He has arrested his own Prime Minister, General Ion Antonescu, abandoned Hitler and Nazi Germany, and joined the Allies.
It was a very, very difficult decision, although we were decided to do it.
His action will have enormous impact and will shorten the war by up to 200 days. He will be showered with honors by both Russia and the United States. But freedom will be short-lived. The very nations that honored him will sell out Romania to Stalin's Russia, and he will be forced into exile.
Very unhappy and very disappointed, because we were sincerely hoping that the United States and Great Britain would do something to try and stop the Russians.
History is written by the winners, and for many years, both Russian leaders and Romanian communists competed to claim credit for the events of 23rd of August. The truth was forgotten. Now we tell the true story of how the 23-year-old king fought a battle of wits with both Hitler and Stalin, and made possible one of the great turning points of World War II. The story is told by King Michael himself. King Michael was the great-great-grandson of three emperors: Queen Victoria, Tsar Alexander II, and Kaiser Wilhelm I. The Romania he ruled over was a young country. Founded just 60 years earlier, its huge resources of oil and grain meant it quickly became an important part of the Western economy. Romania doubled in size when it was awarded new lands under the Versailles Peace Settlement. The country gradually became more westernized, and under Michael's father, King Carol II, grew into an economic powerhouse. But Romania was also where East met West, and was sandwiched between the hammer of Hitler and his Axis allies and the anvil of Stalin's Russia. Hitler was desperate for Romanian oil to provide high-grade fuel for his tanks and aircraft. Stalin wanted to occupy the Romanian border provinces to create a buffer zone on his western frontier. Carol tried to get France and Britain to guarantee Romania's borders, but he failed, and finally he turned to Hitler. When he visited the Führer at Berchtesgaden, Michael went with him.
We took a very long drive to go up to this eagle's nest, as they call it. Those famous steps everybody sees in all the photographs and the movies. We all went up there, and my father disappeared with Hitler and some others, and I stayed out.
King Carol was really brave. He was not afraid. After more than 2 hours of Hitler's monologue, the king was so nervous, he took out a cigar. Hitler said, "Well, we don't smoke here, but of course, for you," and King Carol noted in his diary, "How does he dare tell me that I dare to smoke? To me, a king, Hohenzollern, and he a corporal."
But Hitler did nothing. Instead, he struck a secret deal with Stalin to divide Eastern Europe between them, and allowed Romania to be carved up by its neighbors. 1/3 of Romania was lost. The nation was humiliated by the territorial losses. Romanians held a minute's silence and placed the blame firmly on Carol. He was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, the 19-year-old Prince Michael. Carol went into exile with his mistress, Elena Lupescu.
He tried desperately to get me to go and see him. He wrote me several letters, he called me on the phone. And finally, to try and put an end to this thing, I had to write him a letter. The Romanian people did consider him much at fault, therefore, for respect for the Romanian people and so on, I cannot come and see him.
But while Michael wore the crown, his Prime Minister, General Ion Antonescu, ruled Romania. Antonescu had been the man who forced out Carol, and now he kept Michael far away from the levers of power. But he recognized that Michael needed support. The king's father was gone, and his mother lived abroad.
Antonescu a adresat o telegramă publică mamei regelui Mihai să vină cât mai repede în țară, lângă prea tânărul nostru rege, pentru a-i face educația necesară.
My mother came back after my father left. For that thing, I was really very grateful to Antonescu because he fixed that immediately. I don't know what I could have done or how I could have resisted if she hadn't been there. Because besides her being as she was, she also had this Christian belief very strong, very deep. The strength I got was actually from my mother.
And it was with his mother alongside that he reluctantly accepted an invitation for a return visit to Hitler.
So we took the train and went up to Berlin, see the way around. We had lunch with Hitler. Well, not very pleasant at all.
Hitler considered that King Michael was a young man without education because he didn't bother to get out of the car and open the door for his mother. And then he said, Michael, it's a small, dirty Kröte, he said of German. Kröte is a frog.
I do remember one thing he said then, that he guarantees that the United States is never going to come into the war.
Hitler was wrong. But to the king it must have seemed that the Nazis were now unstoppable and that the last hope of help from the West had been snuffed out. Antonescu lost no time in suspending the constitution, ruling as a virtual dictator.
He was very jealous of everything around him. He had to be the first one. That's why he called himself the word the Conductor in Romanian, which means the leader or the Führer.
In November 1940, Antonescu signed an alliance with Germany and Italy. He saw this as the only way to protect Romania from Russian aggression. The Romanian alliance was of huge benefit to Hitler. He now had the use of the Romanian army, the third largest among the Axis powers. And, most important of all, the vast oil fields of Ploiești were now on tap for the Nazi war machine.
Hitler prepared a war and he needed oil, and for that he needed Romania.
We know that 1/3 of the crude oil resources which were at the disposal of the German war machine in the Second World War came from Romania.
The oil came in the nick of time for Hitler, who was about to launch a surprise invasion of Russia. And when it came, the king was as surprised as everybody else.
My mother came into me one morning and she said, you know, we're all at war. So I said, what? How? And she heard it on the BBC that Romania declared war to the Russians.
He immediately rang Antonescu.
So I called him up on the phone. I said, what is this? Nobody even tells me that. So he had a cheek of a way to tell me, but I thought you were going to see it in the newspapers.
The war was popular with Romanians who hoped it would help them regain the lands lost to Russia and Hungary. But loyalty to Germany did not run very deep, as Hitler's ambassador in Romania, Manfred Killinger, was quick to observe.
When a crowd came in front of the German embassy in Bucharest to hail him for starting the war against Russia, Killinger said, I think that the real state of mind of this public is that they wish we beat the Russians and then we will be beaten by the English.
Antonescu was quick to send Romanian troops to the front. The Führer held him in high esteem, especially his long military record.
So the first time Antonescu and Hitler met, Antonescu spoke for 2 hours, and then the translator spoke for 2 hours. So Hitler sat for 4 hours, and the German interpreter Paul Schmidt writes, "This is the only time I can remember a Führer has sat and listened to a foreign leader for 4 hours."
In 1941, Romanians spearheaded the siege of Odessa, the heavily defended Russian port on the Black Sea. The 25-year-old Niagara Duvara was in the thick of the action. Now in his 100th year, he remembers everything, as though it were yesterday.
Am trecut Nistru pe la Dubăsari și pe urmă de acolo, imediat pe urmă, am coborât către Odessa, în sud. Și vedem la stânga și la dreapta carele sovietice care veneau.
The city fell after a 2-month siege. Back home, Romanians surged into the streets to celebrate the first great victory of the war. But the victory was tarnished by the massacre of thousands of Jews living in Odessa. Pogroms against the Jews had started earlier in 1941, with attacks on Jewish businesses and synagogues. And in the borderlands between Romania and the Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of Jews were rounded up and sent to death camps.
Between 270,000 Jews and 370,000 Jews died in the Holocaust because of Romania and its collaboration with Nazi Germany.
The king was close to the chief rabbi.
And the rabbi was giving me information of what's happening, and I told my mother. So my mother said, well, this cannot go on any longer. We have to try and do something about it.
And on numerous occasions, especially Queen Helen brought up the question of the maltreatment of the Jews, the deportations of the Jews, and for that reason Hitler is said to have suggested to Antonescu that he physically eliminate Queen Helen.
She complained to friends like the Romanian ambassador in Berlin, Raoul Bossi. The Queen said, well, the Germans would like very much kick us out of the country, but don't tell anyone, because they would cut my head off. So she was really afraid.
Mother Queen was very important, and according to some documents and testimonies, it was important in the change of the fate of the Jews.
She managed to save a lot of these here that remain in the country, and at the same time managed to send trains with clothing and food for those, the ones that in Transnistria. And Antonescu accepted it.
Queen Helen would later be awarded the Jewish honor of Yad Vashem, meaning just among the peoples. Meanwhile, the war was going badly for Romania. At Stalingrad, its poorly equipped army suffered massive casualties.
Antonescu was a military man. He must have realized that this is going very badly. He did go sometimes to the headquarters of Hitler and complain that they weren't being helped enough and so on, but no, Hitler as he wouldn't listen.
But Antonescu decided to stick with Hitler.
For him, the question of getting out of the war was that his word as an officer promised to Hitler was above the interests of the country. He said, I'm going to the very end with Hitler.
Antonescu's loyalty was cemented by the award of the Knight's Cross. Now, for the first time, Romanian territory became part of the battlefield. The Ploiești oil fields came under attack. So far, they had just been out of range of the Allied Air Force. But now, American bombers based in the Libyan desert brought these within range. And American President Franklin Roosevelt vowed all-out attack.
We believe that the Nazis and the fascists have asked for it and then gone to get it.
Brest was one of the most heavily defended targets in Europe, forcing the pilots to make their attack at low level.
The first raid that came, the very first one, which I don't know how they managed to do that, but they were flying in treetops. I mean, you could practically touch them in a way, so it was a very easy target to shoot at, being so low. That's why a great number of them were shot down. When we got the telephone, there was an air raid on its way. I was to get in the car and start going down to the oil field. So by the time I got there, the raid was over. Many of the bombers that I got into after they were shot down, I could see there were red dust inside. And that's typical of North Africa.
My father's not a fearful man. My grandmother would tell me how he would go out when the bombs were falling to just sit. Oh, he said, look, it's hot out there. And bring a little bit crazy, but I think that's youth. When you're young, you don't feel a sense of danger for your life.
Over 1,000 American airmen were shot down.
I used to go and see where they were, these airmen. Some were already in hospitals, others were still being interrogated by the gendarmes, you know.
One was being held prisoner in a nearby hut. The king was astonished to see he still had his pistol.
We were sitting there. On the desk in the corner, he had his American Army pistol. I took it there, opened it, took it out. It was a standard 45, you know. So I told him, if you don't mind, I'm going to take this as a remembrance.
As the Allies advanced, they captured key airfields and soon brought most of Romania within range.
Over the coast of Greece, across the rugged Balkan Mountains, past the Danube, the bombers roar upon their mission.
On the 4th of April, 1944, Bucharest was bombed for the first time.
And this was a major shock to the Romanian public, and especially to Antonescu, because they had been largely spared massive bombing from the Allies.
The increasing air raids and the advancing Russians were a lethal combination. Romania needed a way out of the German alliance. The king shared his fears with the country's political leaders. They had been sidelined by Antonescu. Now they plotted a break with Hitler.
So we got together with what was we could call it the opposition, the historical parties, the Liberal Party, the National Peasant Party, and some others, independent people, and ourselves. We made a group. And we had quite a lot of discussions all through the year with the fixed idea that we had to get out of the war.
But how? And would the Allies be prepared to open serious negotiations? In early 1944, the king sent negotiators via Ankara to Cairo.
They went to Cairo to tell them very clearly that we were fed up with this thing, we want to get out because it's not our war anymore.
A existat ideea că România ar putea să negocieze cu Anglia și Statele Unite, numai că de la primele contacte ale lui Barbu Știrbei, mi s-a spus că trebuie să se adreseze în aceeași măsură și reprezentantului sovietic.
While a flurry of secret telegrams went back and forth between Cairo and Bucharest, the Russians seized the initiative and made a direct approach to Antonescu. The move came via Stockholm. Neagu Duvara was sent there as the Romanian emissary. There he met the Russian ambassador, Madame Kollontai. She was an old comrade of Stalin's from the days of the Russian Revolution.
Era o bătrânică îmbrăcată ca în 1914, cu o dantelă la gât, așa, eram destul de interesat să iau legătură cu dânsa. Șeful meu, George Duca, o cunoștea bine, fiindcă cu dânsa am dusese negocieri pentru ieșirea noastră din război.
But Antonescu did not trust the Russians, and with no agreement in Cairo, the king knew he would have to take direct action, and he believed the nation would back him.
The whole population of Romania wanted the same thing. They never talked about it because it's too dangerous.
Hitler had a lot of information that something was brewing in Bucharest.
All Bucharest was full of rumors, and they said we are preparing the great Kachalma, a trick.
What the Germans didn't know was that the man at the very center of the plot was the king himself.
Now the king was, how are you going to do that with all these Germans running around? We had the Gestapo people that had an office just next to the palace.
And Manfred von Killinger, the German minister in Romania, said, when a leaf falls from a tree in Romania, I'm informed of it. I know everything. And he knew nothing.
In August 1944, things became critical when the Russian army broke through Romania's eastern border defenses in Moldavia. With events moving fast, the king called a secret meeting of his inner circle of conspirators. Then he dashed from his country palace of Pelish, jumped in his car, and headed for Bucharest.
When we all rushed down, this must have been the 20th or 21st of August, we called everybody together and said, now, we can't wait.
The coup was set for the 26th of August, but there was one loose end.
That as Antonescu had the army in his hands, he would be the person to get out of the war and ask for an armistice. The question came up, what if he refuses? Well, if he won't do it, we'll have to do it ourselves, but we have to get rid of him.
But the king was worried that the Germans would move against him and rescue Antonescu.
We have to have a team, be it military or civilian or whatever it is, that should take hold of him so that we shouldn't get the same situation as happened to Mussolini.
A year earlier, the King of Italy had also tried to change sides in the war and had arrested Mussolini, but German paratroopers had rescued the dictator. So the king sent a secret telegram to the Americans asking that they bomb German positions to support the coup.
I sent a personal telegram to Maitland Wilson, who was commanding in Italy, and we said we request a massive bombing by the American Air Force on the 26th.
But then the king got worrying news. It came from his own doctor, who had picked up a crossed line.
When the telephone rang, my doctor picked it up, and other fellow at the same time. So he heard a conversation there that Antonescu was going in front on the 24th. So we nearly ran into a panic because he said if he goes to the front, we've lost him.
So the date for the action was brought forward to the 23rd of August, and a meeting with Antonescu was scheduled for the late afternoon of that day. The king had driven to Bucharest in such a hurry that he was still wearing his sports clothes. With the king was his loyal general, Constantine Sinitescu. He had a captain and 3 soldiers in an adjoining room. The appointed time arrived, but there was no sign of Antonescu.
We were getting rather nervous there, we didn't know what was happening. No, it was a very, very, very tense moment, so we knew what might have to happen.
Then, half an hour late, Antonescu's car drew up.
This is a long conversation, lasted about an hour nearly. In short, it was that I said, this is a situation that cannot continue. We cannot defend ourselves. The Russians are too much. We have to get out.
The king gave Antonescu one last chance to ditch Hitler, but he dug in his heels.
He refused flatly. And that's why he said this thing about his promise to Hitler, that he's going to be with him. He is an officer, he gave his word of honor. He went on refusing, and the General Sinitescu there tried to get him to understand reason, nothing doing. So then I had this code word saying, he said, I'm very sorry, but then there's nothing more I can do, or something like that. That's when they came in, the 3 NCOs with the captain. And Antonescu suddenly looked around. And I can see if it was yesterday. And he turns around to us on the desk and says, "What is this?" And then they got hold of him, took him out in the hallway, and that's where he, on the first step, he spat at him. And he said, "Tomorrow you'll be hanged in the main square." And then Killinger suddenly asked to see me.
Killinger was Hitler's ambassador in Romania. He had been taken completely unawares.
He came there furious, looking like, murder in his eyes. I said, "What's going on here? Where's Antonescu?" So we had to invent this thing through an interpreter, and I said, "Antonescu has found the situation so bad that he said he can't cope with it anymore and he's resigned." We had someone who was in a telephone company in the same building as we are now still today. They cut all the German telephone lines.
The king then recorded a message to the nation announcing the coup.
Then they bought all the machines then. At the time it was quite different then. It was records, it wasn't tape. So I recorded the whole thing and then they put it on the radio at 10 o'clock.
La un moment dat, un speaker zice, nu părăsiți postul de radio, în câteva momente așteptați, va fi o știre importantă pentru țară.
At last the king could tell the nation the words they had been yearning to hear. The alliance with Hitler was ended.
In a matter of 15-30 minutes, the whole square in front of the palace filled with people. They heard it all and they all came running out, the whole town practically.
O imensă mulțime adunată în piața Palatului Regal a manifestat îndelung pentru maestatea sa regele Mihai I și pentru maestatea sa regina mama Elena.
The king now had the people's support and control of the army.
When Hitler found out about what had happened in Bucharest, he was extremely furious.
Hitler said, "Smash the Romanian conspiracy." Signed, Hitler. That was all.
He was so furious of the Romanian people that he would like to destroy all of Romania and to annihilate Romanians as a nation.
German dive bombers were given precise coordinates and tried to kill the king by bombing his favorite house in the palace grounds.
Zorii zilei de 24 august, aviația germană bombarda Bucureștiul, a distrus inclusiv partea din Palatul Regal unde avusese loc convorbirea între regele Mihai și Antonescu.
S-auzeau bombardamente asupra Bucureștiului. Era aviația germană, care cred că a făcut poate mai multe stricăciuni, mai ales în centru istoric, decât aviația americană.
But on the morning of 26th of August, American bombers appeared in the sky. They had come in response to the king's telegram and bombed the German positions. It was a knockout blow. The Germans were finished. The once powerful Manfred Killinger had been humiliated by a 23-year-old king. He shot his secretary, and then he shot himself. After the coup, everything changed. American bombers and fighters now supported the Romanian army, and American prisoners of war were released.
It's remarkable in retrospect the courage that King Michael showed as a very young man to take it under his own leadership, and so it became a supporter of the Allies instead of working with Hitler's war machine. I've seen a lot of statecraft. To pull something like that off, it takes huge courage.
The achievement was later acknowledged by President Harry Truman's Legion of Merit citation. The king, on his own initiative and in complete disregard for his own safety, gave the signal for a coup and called upon his army to turn upon the German troops. Today, the Russians support that assessment.
Молодой король, этот красивый, элегантный человек, принял мужественное решение повернуть оружие против агрессора.
King Michael proved that he had been capable of preparing a really fantastic coup, which also impressed some of the German commentators who said this is not just a putsch of a camarilla, this is a full-fledged political coup which is supported not only by the army but which also was supported by the Romanian people.
Well, we had a big luck. I would say God's hand in that in a way because it was really, really dangerous. It worked. And they did not expect that. Because when this thing happened, the next day the big Russian advance on our front stopped.
Leading communist Lucrețiu Potrușcanu was dismayed.
Potrușcanu comes straight up to me, looking white in the face, and said, "What have you done? You ruined us." And if you look back at the war, you see that the Poles did the same thing in Warsaw. There was a big upheaval. The Russian offensive stopped. In the meantime, the Germans pushed the whole lot, and then the Russians came in. And they planned to do the same thing with us. That is why Potrușcanu said that you've ruined us, because we spoiled their plans. But if we hadn't done this, you can imagine if the Russians had come as straightforward enemies, that would have been a complete end of everything.
Новости о перевороте были чрезвычайно положительно восприняты теми, кто их получил. И мы понимали, сколько сотен тысяч жизней мы можем сберечь благодаря тому, что в подбрюшье логова гитлеризма появился вместо врага, вместо противника союзник.
Știam cam de la 1 kilometru că vin trupele sovietice. Era un miros îngrozitor, un miros greu de împuțiciune, de murdărie.
The Russians raced across Romania and entered Bucharest 1 week after the coup.
There was no offensive anymore, they just walked through. They didn't liberate anything at all because we, in 48 hours, we took 50,000 German prisoners from the top general to the last soldier. When the Russians arrived in Bucharest, there was nobody German. Finished.
Intrând în București, am văzut tancuri sovietice, marile tancuri T-34. Copiii se urcau pe tancuri acolo. Era un oarecare entuziasm.
Hitler had lost 100,000 men taken prisoner, his main oil supplier, and all of the Balkans.
If you look at the map of the time of the front where the German armies were, right down from Greece up to Poland, when we did this what we did, the whole thing collapsed. And the Germans had to get out of there in a hurry. So in that sense, it shortened the war.
Există în istoriografia engleză aprecierea că ieșirea României din război a scurtat războiul din Europa cu circa 200 de zile.
It's a remarkable action in history with big impact.
Первое, это сбережено было очень много жизней, раз. Сохранена государственная Румынии, два. И в-третьих, это, наверное, 2-3 месяца в сроках прохождения и взятия Берлина.
But the triumph of the coup was already being undermined by secret negotiations between Churchill and Stalin. Churchill wanted to crush the rise of communism in Greece. Stalin was prepared to sacrifice the Greek communists in return for a free hand in Romania. A quick agreement was needed because although they were allies, Churchill and Roosevelt did not trust Stalin 1 inch.
It was nothing to prevent, in the final days, Stalin from still cutting an agreement with the Führer to freeze hostilities unless we could keep him engaged.
The deal was sealed at the Moscow Conference in October 1944. Churchill proposed that Stalin have 90% control of Romania and Britain 90% control of Greece. Stalin okayed it with a large blue tick.
You could call it appeasement, you could call it recognition, you could call it anything you want, but the objective was to finish Nazi Germany.
Churchill called it a naughty document. He suggested burning it, but Stalin said, no, keep it.
Romania for him was his piece of cake.
The bravery of the king and his people had counted for nothing, and the secret deal was ratified a few months later at the Yalta Conference. The Russians lost no time in making the deal a reality.
Very unhappy and very disappointed because we were sincerely hoping that the United States and Great Britain would do something to try and stop the Russians from doing what they did.
He understood the historical context, but on the other hand, obviously, those feelings can't die because our country was in hell. The people here suffered terribly.
The King's story of the days that followed is a virtual anatomy of a communist takeover. Stalin handpicked one of his most brutal henchmen, Andrei Wyszynski, to be his man in Romania. As Stalin's chief prosecutor, he had sent thousands of his countrymen to their deaths.
He was sent by Molotov and Stalin, of course, to engineer the whole takeover. So he did it in small steps.
Wyszynski insisted that the pro-Russian Petro Groza be installed as prime minister.
I told him one moment, I said, well, according to the Yalta agreement, every country is allowed to choose their own way. So they also got furious. They said, here I am Yalta. And then when I said again, I can't, he bashed his fist on the table, started to scream. And he got up and went out and smashed the door until he cracked the wall.
Wyszynski forced the king to appoint Groza. To many it seemed a strange choice, but although Groza had been a landowner and banker, Stalin had a soft spot for his Romanian puppet.
Stalin invited him with a whole Politburo, and at one moment Stalin said, Pyotr Ivanovich, what is your opinion? And Groza said, how can I give you counsel? I came here to learn from you. Stalin said to others, you see, that's the way to speak to the great rulers.
The king regarded Groza as crude and obnoxious.
We used to say pretty dirty jokes in front of ladies. All sorts of stupid, nasty jokes. He thought he was terribly funny. He used to die laughing about it. Nobody laughed, but he did.
The king refused to cooperate with the communist government, and without him no new laws could be passed. This royal strike had huge popular support. Stalin tried to win the king over. Maybe bribery would work, where persuasion had failed.
Stalin a hotărât să-l decoreze pe regele Mihai cu ordinul Victoria, Oveda, cea mai înaltă decorație sovietică, pentru rolul avut în momentul 23 august 1944, când se spunea în decret, soarta războiului nu fusese încă hotărâtă.
So we thought that this might be a bribe, that they'd done all this big honor and made such an enormous fuss about it and all that, to try and sort of get me to be more lenient with them.
Meanwhile, the Soviets began settling scores with old enemies. General Antonescu was handed over and taken to prison in Moscow. In 1946, he was brought back to Romania to be tried as a war criminal.
El trebuia judecat pentru atitudinea pe care o luase, care, după părerea mea, a fost antinațională. Fiindcă la un moment dat, când s-a părut clar că Germania pierdea războiul, noi, românii, avem tradiția totuși că știm să sărim din barcă la vreme când se neacă vaporul. Ori aici, cu Antonescu, a mers până la sfârșit.
Sentenced to death, his request to be shot by the army was denied. Instead, a makeshift firing squad was thrown together.
People accuse me of not promoting his sentence, but I think all the three allies, United States, Britain and Russia, would never accept it not to shoot him.
In October 1947, the king was invited to London to attend the wedding of the future Queen Elizabeth and his second cousin, Prince Philip of Greece. The communist leaders waved goodbye, hoping that Michael would seize his chance and stay in Europe.
And Groza came, of course, and he was delighted. He said, for God's sake, go there. Because if we don't go there, everybody's going to say that we're keeping you prisoner.
In a small plane, piloted by himself from the continent, King Michael of Romania arrived with his mother, Queen Helen, at London Airport. King Michael is now the only sovereign still reigning in the troubled sphere of the Balkans.
Suddenly, in another place where you don't have this oppression going on around you, you sort of, breathe out, breathing freedom, so to speak.
And there was a silver lining to the London trip. On a night out, the king met his future wife, Anne of Bourbon-Parma.
I really had met her a few days before at the cottages we were staying. From one thing to the other, we got to like each other. So when we went to this party at the Luxembourg house, I think in a sense I sort of half proposed to her there. And she said no. She got a fright of me. King George, he invited us to Buckingham Palace and he wanted to know from me what was going on.
Queen Helen also buttonholed British Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin.
He was the only one we met at that time that was absolutely honest with us. So he very clearly said, Britain is in no position to do anything.
Together they sought Winston Churchill's advice.
He just said this, I have always taken the courageous path. And then he walked off.
I think what Churchill meant was, do the courageous thing and go back to your country. But he didn't say it in so many words. Whereas a lot of other people were saying, oh, don't go back, you'll get killed, it's dangerous, you're going to put your mother's life in danger.
And Michael did take the courageous path. He returned to Romania.
Michael was the last king behind the Iron Curtain, and he intended to last the very last moment.
The communists were furious that the king had returned.
When we left, the whole government was at the airport here. All smiles, all warm, everything wonderful and so on. The moment we came back, the whole thing was icy. You see their faces.
There were ministers who didn't shake his hand, like Lucrece Pătășcanu, the famous communist. He turned his back to the king.
Then, just after Christmas 1947, Petru Groza asked to visit the Elisabetta Palace to discuss a family matter.
So, family matter, we thought must have been this thing to do with our engagement.
Groza a avut o introducere în stilul caracteristic, adică așa mai glumeață, în care a spus că a venit vremea să ne despărțim elegant de monarhie și ne-a prezentat actul de abdicare.
Groza came out and said, look, we have 1,000 young people in prison here, and if you don't do this quick, we'll have to shoot the lot. Very clear. When he showed his pocket like that, he said, feel it. I felt it, he had a pistol in him. And then he turns there with a big smile to my mother and said it in German. So I have this so that it shouldn't happen to me what happened to Antonescu.
The king checked and found the phone line had been cut and the palace guard had been replaced with communist soldiers.
What do you want to do? I mean, the only thing I said, I cannot take the responsibility just for me to go, you go and kill all these people. So I had to sign it.
Heartbroken, he and his mother left his mountain palace of Pelesh and began the journey to the railway station and exile. But when they got there, they found the vindictive Groza had prepared one final twist of the knife.
Just to show you how low down these people were, they put a line of officers with their backs turned to me. There was one captain at the very end of one of the rows who just turned his head a little bit to look at me. And he was crying.
When he left this country, he said in French, La mort dans l'âme. It means death in my soul. It was death in my soul when I left. That was the worst thing, to be ripped out, amputated from your country.
The windows of the carriage had been sealed shut, and once the king and his mother were on board, they were covered with dark cloth. They moved off into the night, nervous as to their final destination.
We were worried that you never know with these people what to do. If they're going to divert the train, instead of going to Switzerland, they're going to Russia.
The train rumbled across country for almost 2 days.
We slept in the train. Next day, we got to a place we didn't know where it was. The train stopped. Somewhere in nowhere, no? My mother got a little bit jumpy that we didn't hear anything, no voices, nothing, and the train moved on. Moved on a little bit and stopped again. So we all rather know what was going on. And then I heard a jeep coming up to the wagon. And the door opens. I think he was a lieutenant or a captain, American. And you know, he got in here, looked at us, and just said, "Now you're free."
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to John for he'll be delighted we've watched that, and we won't have a formal discussion now, time to split and then have dinner, but any reactions do let me know and I'll pass those on. So thank you very much and see you at dinner.